You can talk to almost any Jew today, any Muslim, any Hindu, and he will trace you back to the atrocities that were committed in the name of Christ for centuries. That is the umbrella under which you and I have to live. And that is the tragedy. Because in the Middle Eastern and the Eastern world, history never dies. It always lives. Mahatma Gandhi was asked what he thought of Christianity. He said, I like their Christ, I don't like their Christian, because when I think of the Christian, he said, I think of the Christian with a mug of beer in one hand and a chunk of beef in the other hand. So today, when you talk to an Orthodox Hindu and try to minister to him for Christ, remember this statement that I read to you. Because it brings with it an unfair perception. But that is the perception. Any prejudice will distort your perception. And any stigma can lick a good dogma. Let me tell you what I mean by this. I was speaking to about 1,200 people in an auditorium. One of my colleagues was there with me. Most of them were Hindus. At the end, there were 153 who made first-time commitments to Christ that night. Most of them high-placed executives. There was a Hindu executive in the first or second row. He went over to my colleague in India, who's our fellow evangelist there, and he went over to him afterwards and said to him, if anybody here was not touched tonight, I want to see that man. That's the degree to which the Lord had spoken to him that night. But then he went over to his subordinate who had invited him to the meetings, and he said to his subordinate, the only reason I came here tonight is because that man is Indian. There is a large group of people with whom that prejudice still exists. Therefore, if you're trying to reach a Hindu for Christ, it's a long road. And one of the roads that you'll have to cross is his confidence that you love him or her for who they are, not for something that you're trying to manipulate them into. And I would like to try and bring this all to a conclusion by giving you some principles in which you and I as Christians need to respond to it. Number one, when you're dealing with a Hindu, always go slowly. Go slowly. Please do not try to move fast. It never comes that quickly. Number two, show respect for what he or she believes without compromise. One of the missionary candidates who applied was born in India and knew some of the Indian languages better than I do. And he loved the country and wanted to go back, applied for a missionary visa, and they asked him purpose for coming, and he put down there to teach people about God. He will never, ever get a visa. They turned him down on a blacklist. My father was alive at that time. He was going to try and contact, because my dad was very highly placed in the government and in fact was in charge of the visa department, would probably have been able to try to do something. Shortly before he left, my dad passed away. But when he found out what had been said, he said, they will never change that line. He said, you don't tell a people of that respect for their own heritage that you're coming there to teach them about God when the whole nation is steeped in religion. So there has to be a definite sense of showing respect without compromising. Number three, do not assume. Do not assume that just because you are not identical in the culture, therefore you cannot reach the person. It's just tougher, but it shows a process of love and it can be done. It takes the patience, but it must be done. Fourth, always listen to their felt problems. It is one thing to talk, it is another thing to listen, and each person feels it differently. Number five, the young people are the most widely open to it. Number six, focus on the person of Christ and personal relationship. And I could go into doctrines that give them trouble, such as the doctrine of sin, such as the problem with denominationalism, such as the problem with exclusivity, and so on. But the last thing I want to say to you is, please allow for the supernatural, because I am convinced in most religions like Islam and Hinduism, Hinduism is steeped in idolatry. Islam has a doctrine of angels and an awful lot of satanic influence in their religion, so that when you see even a Muslim convert for years to come, you'll see all kinds of struggle with what they've got in terms of oppression, possession, and so on. Allow for the intervention of the supernatural in many of these. And lastly, I say, be careful after the point of commitment to try to deluge them with too much too soon. If you look at 2 Kings 5, when Naaman believed in Yahweh, and Naaman the Syrian, and he looked at Elisha and he said, I want to ask you a question. When I go back and my master asks me, when he leans on me to bow down before his own God of Rimmon, even though I will not be bowing down because he leans on me, my body half bends involuntarily. Is it all right for me to be there in the temple of Rimmon while my master is leaning on me? Elisha doesn't even answer the question directly. He just says to him, you go on, go in peace. And I think it is because Elisha felt Naaman would come to his own conviction and his own answer in the right time. You couldn't prescribe it with a sense of immediacy and send him on. My uncle is a Hindu, and I think this is an interesting story for you to hear. In his car, all kinds of idols on the dashboard. I have known him for about 10 years. Every time he came to listen to me preach, he would put his arm around me, almost like saying, I'm very proud of you. He said, wait a minute, I poured my heart out trying to tell you what this message is about in Christ. But the suctioning in goes on. It adds, never subtracts. So this uncle of mine would come for every meeting. And we were preaching. And on Sunday morning, after I finished preaching, I said to my wife, something has happened to Uncle Eddie. I said, he looks at me differently. He talks to me differently. And after I finished the message in the church to which he came, he took me to a friend of his in his wheelchair and said, son, will you pray for this friend of mine? I thought to myself, what does he want me to pray for a friend of his about? Where's he coming from? Next day he said, I'd like to have breakfast with you. So he and my aunt came. We were all at the table. And Sundar being from an immediate Hindu background. And Sundar was at the table and we were eating and he said, can you excuse us for a moment? And he told us he'd want to talk to him. Went and sat down for about 1 or maximum 2 minutes. And they came back. I thought to myself, wonder what happened in 2 minutes. So Sundar tells us afterwards, you know what he said to me? He sat down and said to me, I wanted to become a Christian some time ago, but I went to see a priest there, and the priest said to me, no, please don't become one. You are intended to remain in the religion in which you are born. You're intended to remain in the state in which you were born. So he says to Sundar, what do you think of that? The Lord gave Sundar wisdom. Sundar had just one question for him. He said, would you have felt the same way if you were poor? And he says to him, thank you. That answers my question. You can tell Prakash, who's our evangelist there, that I have become a Christian. I now want to get baptized. When I was there again, and my aunt said to me, son, how can I ever thank you for what you did for Uncle? I said, Auntie, did you hear what he said when he was getting baptized? He told the pastor before he got baptized, for all these years I kept saying, no man will ever convince me of Christianity. Let us take him at his word. No man did. I said, Auntie, the Spirit of God did. It happens. It happens in the strangest way of intervention. Why is it that it appeals to the Westerner? Listen here. This is a writer on Asian religions. The new Hinduism encourages a search within oneself to achieve harmony with the forces of change in the modern world. The inner search is attractive to many today. To fall into the flow of things, to get into touch with the process of growth, to sense a harmony with divine energy which works beneath the more visible forces of change in the world is an inviting alternative to struggling with moral choices. And then he says this, and it is especially appealing to those who are troubled by a sense of incompetence before the impersonal institutions which manipulate us. Caving into the pressures for conformity and going with the flow is far easier than finding good reasons to take a stand at some position of moral obligation. What this philosophy has done has given the Westerner the opportunity of having his cake and eating it too. Now he can say there are no moral absolutes. Now he can say there is no personal God. Now he can say I can sit in the middle of the day and meditate and do what I want and then go out there and live for the world, the flesh and the devil, as it were, and pay out my karma as time comes out. It gives them a back door for escape. And that's why I say the New Age movement is nothing more than an attempt at mitigating the bankruptcy of secularism with the spurious glitter of Eastern mysticism.
The message you heard today is available in its entirety on CD or cassette. Just ask for message number 147 entitled The Spurious Glitter of Pantheism.